And welcome to the new year of digital discussions with the Milwaukee County Historical Society. I hope everybody has a great 2021, off to obviously a very quiet start in the world. I might be lagging a little bit. We'll see how this works. I'm glad that you all could join us. Hope that you can enjoy tonight's program with Cody Schreck, Milwaukee historian, one of our former employees at the Historical Society, our collections, former collections assistant with our curator, Ben Barbera. A lot of the exhibits you've seen over the past few years, Cody had a large part in putting together. We'll have a question and answer at the end. So if you have any questions, make sure you put them in the comments. And of course, without any further ado, Cody, take it away.
All right. Hi, everyone. Again, thanks MCHS and John for having me. As John said, I was a collections assistant for the Historical Society for a few years. Also docented at the Kilbourne Townhouse in Estabrook Park. So you might have seen me there. Also worked at the front desk a little bit, so you might have seen me there too. So I've had some varying roles at the Historical Society. As a Milwaukee historian, which is great. I actually kind of consider myself a student of Milwaukee history more than an expert on really anything. Like to more explore things in Milwaukee history than I like to claim I know everything about them. But it's great to be here. I also did work on the Encyclopedia of Milwaukee, which for those of you that enjoy Milwaukee history, if you've never used the Encyclopedia of Milwaukee, I strongly encourage you to go look at it, emke.uwm.edu. It's a great resource. But today, I digress, we're talking about generational events in Milwaukee's history. So every 25 years, events that have happened. With the time machine, obviously an homage to the famous ATM machines that became famous in the 70s. And Wisconsinites got some interesting looks when they went elsewhere asking where the time machine was. Do have to give some credit to Assistant Archivist Steve Schaffer for coming up with the time machine for this use, I should say, the transportable yearly memory engine, as he called it. So, yeah, give credit to where credit's due. But we're going to start. Let's take a look here. If I can get my slide to change. There it is. So like I said, we're going to be looking back every 25 years. And it's going to be going back all the way to the beginning. So 1846. 2021 will be the 175th anniversary of Milwaukee. So we're going to go all the way back to 1846. And then we'll jump ahead 25 years to 1871, then 1896, and so on, looking at one or two significant events that happened that year locally. And as I mentioned, we are going to start 175 years ago in 1846. And we called this the start of Milwaukee for obvious reasons. This is the year that Milwaukee became Milwaukee. The area, of course, has a human history that goes back thousands of years with Native Americans. But 1846 is when Milwaukee becomes the Milwaukee that we know today. Our first event, January 31st, 1846. This is the day that the city of Milwaukee actually incorporated as a city. As many of you, I'm sure, know, Milwaukee started as competing settlements. There was Juneautown on the east side of the river, Kilbourne Town west of the river, and then Walker's Point in the south. Juneautown and Kilbourne Town had actually merged as the town of Milwaukee originally in 1839, and then Walker's Point joined them in 1845. In 1845 was a pretty significant date too, or year, I should say, because that's when the competition between these settlements really came to a head, to a point. And the Bridge War occurred, what it's called. Juneautown, members of Juneautown, members of Kilbourne Town were in heated arguments about the bridges that crossed the Milwaukee River, who would repair them, how they were impacting commerce. And it got to the point that is depicted in this famous watercolor where members on the east side of the river actually brought a cannon out and faced it at Kilbourne's house west of the river. Now, they were talked down from actually shooting the cannon because Kilbourne was supposedly mourning the loss of his daughter from the night before. So no one actually dies in this bridge war, but it was a pretty big point in Milwaukee history that brought them on January 5th of 1846 to talk about bringing the city together as one. So there was a referendum held on January 5th where there was a city charter talked about, as well as authorization to improve bridges in the city, which of course was important. And January 31st, 1846, this referendum passed and Milwaukee became a city. Now, it was not unanimous. Milwaukee was divided even still at this point. Those west of the river and those south of the river, or those in Kilbourne Town and Walker's Point, overwhelmingly supported the referendum to join as a city, but those on the east side did not. Those in Juneau Town actually overwhelmingly voted, I think it was like 320 to 180, to not be joined as a city. And that was really because they felt that they would bear most of the economic impact of having a new city, whether that was through public utilities or through maintenance. But nonetheless, the city was created. The charter granted 5 wards autonomy in financial matters. It also actually organized Waukesha County into its own separate county. So 1846 also marks the date that Waukesha becomes its own county. And of course, with Milwaukee becoming a city, a mayor is also elected. When the city was created, it was 7 square miles, bounded by North Avenue in the north, Greenfield in the south, 27th to the west, and the lake in the east. And let's see here. Yeah, so like I mentioned, a mayor was elected, and we all know who that was. If I can get him to pop up on the screen. There he is, Solomon Juneau. So Juneau in 1846 is elected the first mayor, and he rightfully is kind of thought of as the poster child of early Milwaukee. But in many ways, he's more of a transitional figure. It's better to think of him as someone who was the poster child from transitioning Milwaukee from native Milwaukee to the Milwaukee we know today. And I say that because he's only in Milwaukee for 2 years. He's elected in 1846 as the mayor for the city of Milwaukee, and within 2 years he leaves. He was not a city man. He was very much a frontiersman by trade. So he leaves and founds the town of Teresa, Wisconsin, where he re-entered the fur trade. He ended up dying in Teresa, I think it was 1856, around there. But yeah, so Juneau, this father of Milwaukee, was only in the city of Milwaukee for 2 years. And if we jump ahead 25 years, we're going to go to 1871. If I get my computer to get there. There it is, 150 years ago in 1871. So only 25 years removed from being a pioneer settlement that just merged together, and Milwaukee is already a growing metropolis. And there's some evidence of that happening in 1871. So the first thing that happens in 1871 that's significant in terms of becoming a metropolis is that Milwaukee begins a works project on March 24th of 1871. So prior to this, Milwaukee was like a lot of other early Milwaukee city or early United States cities, that they moved water to residents and businesses. They dealt a lot with, diseases that came from poor waterworks systems like cholera. And what you see here on the left actually comes from the Historical Society collections. They look like logs, and that's because they are. They are hollowed out tamarack logs. And that's actually what Milwaukee used originally for water piping. So there's a hole in the middle of each of these 3 logs that would carry water from natural springs, say on Spring Street, which is now Wisconsin, down grade towards places like the Wisconsin or the United States Hotel, which was the first, I believe the first building to actually have running water. And they used this water system, tamarack logs. But on March 24th, that had become insufficient. They couldn't keep doing it. So on March 24th, 1871, they hired a gentleman by the name of E.S. Chesborough. He was famous throughout the United States as kind of a sewer waterworks genius. He designed the sewer system for Chicago. He also designed the sewer system for, I believe it was Boston. And the plans and the engineering plans that he laid out are eventually what gave us places like the North Point pumping station and the piping that is inside of the North Point water tower. So it was a real signal post that Milwaukee was growing as a city in just 25 years, that they were embarking on this kind of nationally renowned waterworks project. And then elsewhere in the city, let's take a look here. Some cultural things were happening that are indicative of a growing city. A place might not be familiar by this name, but by other names it will be. On September 17th, 1871, the Nunemacher Opera House opens. So it opened in 1871 on water and wells. And what you see here is Market Hall, which at one point actually had served as City Hall. And it's significant because this is actually where City Hall is right now. I believe this is actually probably where that statue in front of City Hall is, but this is now the site of City Hall, and this is the Nunemaker Opera House. It opened on September 17th, 1871, and that night the Philharmonic Society did a play or a show, Martha. That was the opening show. And it operated at this site pretty successfully until 1890, when Frederick Pabst actually bought the whole block. He bought the entire block, including this building, and renamed it the Stadt Theater. And the Stadt Theater operated until 1893, and in 1895, there was some pretty significant fire damage to the building that rendered it unusable. So what Pabst did is he demolished the entire Nunemaker Opera House, or the Stadt Theater at the time. Is once removed really the origins of the Pabst Theater in 1871. And then we'll jump ahead another 25 years to 125 years ago. And this is only 50 years removed again from Milwaukee being the merging of settlements, pioneer settlements. And Milwaukee is already this really at the height of its German Athens period in 1896. And it's the site of some pretty topical debates that are happening nationwide, coming to Milwaukee to talk about very important things. And some of the things that are being talked about by this man. Name of Milwaukee on January 20th, 1896. And he visited a few churches in the area on his speaking tour. The topic he was talking about on the speaking tour was, quote, solving the problem in the Black Belt of the South. So it was part of his national tour following his famous Atlanta Compromise speech that had happened a year earlier. This was around the time that his colleagues like E.B. Du Bois were starting to criticize him for being a little too conforming to white interests. But nonetheless, his focus during this national talking tour, and really just of his rhetoric in general, was focused on Black economic and social advancement through industrial education at a time when the South was struggling with things like sharecropping and crippling debt for Black Americans. And you might be wondering, why would Booker T. Washington be talking about these topics in a small, well, not small, but a growing city, in a growing northern city like Milwaukee? North and South were not so separated as we may believe. White Southerners and Northerners alike controlled both the social and political life at the time. And there were some pretty heavy hitters in Milwaukee who was arguing, and he felt that he needed to come to Milwaukee and speak. And what's significant about this visit is really the churches he visited. He visited St. Paul's Episcopal. He also visited the African Methodist Episcopal Church, and he visited Plymouth Church. And if you know anything about these congregations, which are all in some capacity still alive today, you know that they're all very different. St. Paul's Episcopal, historically a very wealthy white church. St. Mark's AME, which is still around, is the oldest historically Black congregation in Milwaukee. And then Plymouth, which is a pretty diverse congregation, really focused on social justice. So Booker T. Washington, when he came to Milwaukee, he knew that he had different audiences he wanted to talk to, and he knew Milwaukee had the audiences he wanted to talk to. So being part of this national scene for big figures who are talking about very topical things. And as I already mentioned, 1896 is also kind of the height of Milwaukee's German Athens. And one of the temples of German Athens was the Schlitz Palm Garden, and it opened July 3rd, 1896. It was one of Milwaukee's, if not the most famous beer hall in Milwaukee. It was located on North 3rd Street, and it was attached to the Schlitz Hotel. It was a place that featured things like, food, music, dancing, community events. And it was a main centerpiece of the era of downtown grand leisure German Athens at its peak. It was, a few blocks away from German publishing newspapers. And it was built at a time when the German-born population in Milwaukee was really near its peak. And in many ways, the Schlitz Palm Garden was open because of being a community center and being this grand place to live or visit, but it also served as a sort of a retail outlet and visitor center for the brewery. It was really somewhere besides a tavern for Schlitz to sell their product and kind of sell themselves to a higher class or higher society. It did unfortunately close due to prohibition in the 1920s. So its life was short, but it was very well remembered in Milwaukee. And now we'll jump ahead to the centennial mark. So 100 years ago. So 1921. Some things happening in 1921 which are similar to today. And I mean, at least in theme, there was some pretty significant Supreme Court rulings in 1921 and some once-in-a-lifetime concerts occurring in 1921. Well, let's hope that there's some once-in-a-lifetime concerts in 2021 as well. So we'll start here. The Supreme Court ruling I'm referring to is the one regarding Victor Berger. It's 1921 is when Victor Berger's conviction is reversed by the Supreme Court. So Victor Berger, being the famous socialist from Milwaukee and newspaperman, who with Eugene Debs founded the Socialist Party, had served in Congress and passed things like old age pension and labor rights, and went back to being the editor for the Milwaukee Leader. And it was in 1917, as the editor for the Milwaukee Leader, that he posted a bunch of editorials that were very much anti-World War I. And this got him in trouble in 1918. He was sentenced on the Espionage Act. He was sentenced, what ended up being a 20-year prison sentence for anti-sedition, under anti-sedition laws and Espionage Act laws. What's weird is he actually ended up winning a Congress seat while he was being sentenced. So in 1918, he won a Congress seat, and in 1919 went to go occupy that seat, but they wouldn't let him. They said, no, like, you're convicted, you can't take the seat. So there was a special election held. He tried again to claim a seat, couldn't claim it, and eventually in January 21st, 1921, he brought that Victor Berger went on to win Congress seats in 1922, 1924, 1926, and then he eventually died tragically in a streetcar accident in 1929. So a pretty incredible story for a local politician who, I mean, he did shape really Milwaukee politics for the early part of the 19th century, or the 20th century, I should say. And then not too long later, I believe it was in February. Yeah, February 16th, 1921. Opportunity to attend a once-in-a-lifetime concert. The very famous, world-famous Italian conductor Arturo Toscanini paid his only visit to Milwaukee on February 16th, 1921, and he played at the auditorium. Worked for the Metropolitan Opera in New York, the New York Philharmonic, the Chicago Symphony Orchestra, and the NBC Symphony Orchestra. And of course, like I said, a very world-famous conductor, but also just a very interesting figure overall. He actually ran as a fascist candidate in Milan in 1919. Actually ended up renouncing fascism for the most part by the time he had come to visit Milwaukee. And reports say he had come to hate Mussolini by 1922, who was, of course, the leader of the fascist movement in Italy at the time. But nonetheless, he came to Milwaukee once in his life, and it was in 1921 on a 1920-1921 North American tour, and they came to the auditorium. And I was actually able to find a recording of Toscanini and the La Scala Orchestra playing on this 1921 North American tour. So if John is able to help me out, we may be able to actually listen to what Milwaukeeans heard.
We do not have the recorder. It's not working. But I will put the link to the YouTube that you found in the comments. So if people want to listen to it, to hear what it would have sounded like, I'll pop it in there in just a minute.
All right, thank you. Yeah, so if you have time either afterwards or while we're listening here, yeah, it's cool. I mean, it's a recording from that North American tour, so you can hear exactly what Milwaukeeans could have heard as they sat in the auditorium that night, which is a cool experience. The auditorium itself was the primary public spectator facility at the time. It replaced the Exposition Center in 1909. Of course, the Exposition Center had burned down. So this is where people came to see concerts like Toscanini. And Milwaukee was a stop on a world famous conductor's tour. So pretty interesting. And we'll jump ahead. 1946. So if you're doing the math, it's been 100 years now since Milwaukee became a city. And Milwaukeeans in 1946 knew that, obviously. So they were reflecting on the past in 1946. There's a chance there's someone watching tonight who may have been alive at this point. I was not alive, but maybe you remember some of this stuff, or maybe your parents talked about it. We'll take a look. So it being the Milwaukee obviously celebrated that. And that was the Centurama celebration. So this happened, it really happened throughout the year. It started officially in January. There was things like car races and boxing. There was like a 3-hour-long parade, music and drama performances, exhibitions. It was really akin to like a World's Fair, but for Milwaukee. But really the main attraction of this entire celebration was a month-long festival held on the lakefront. So we're familiar with lakefront festivals now. It's kind of ingrained in our modern Milwaukee culture. At the time, wasn't as much of a thing. This main attraction downtown or lakefront month-long festival included an air and water show that was held out of Maitland, which is now where the Summerfest grounds is. And the centerpiece of all of it, of the entire Centurama celebration and of the lakefront festival itself, was this amphitheater stage that was built in Entrance Park. It was built to house around 9,000 people. And it held a nightly performance, as well as many other performances, but it held a nightly performance telling the story of Milwaukee's 100-year rise to a metropolis. And although we see pictures of the packed amphitheater and all that kind of stuff, it did supposedly underperform with attendance estimates, so it wasn't as popular as people thought. Still popular, but not as well attended as they anticipated. There was talks of perhaps creating a permanent downtown stage or lakefront stage after this, but there was really no traction gained from that. So the era of the lakefront festivals and the lakefront amphitheater stage doesn't really get a hold until a few decades later. And then elsewhere in 1946, somewhat happening simultaneously, if I can pull it up, Daniel Hone runs for. We know Daniel Hone. He's got his name everywhere on the Daniel Hone Bridge. He was elected city attorney on the socialist ticket in 1910. Accomplished dramatic changes in Milwaukee, 24 years as mayor, until Zeidler defeated him in 1940. And after his defeat in 1940, he really realigned himself with progressives and Democrats. That's how he won the Democratic nomination for governor in 1944 and 1946. He did end up losing both of those races. So he never achieved governorship, even though he ran twice. Really unsuccessful index. But more significantly, in 1946 in Wisconsin politics, not specific necessarily to Milwaukee, but it had an impact nonetheless. 1946 is when Joe McCarthy beats Robert La Follette Jr. for a Senate seat. So that race in 1946 shapes American politics for the near future from there on out. But really, 46 is when we start to see the Daniel Hone era fade away. And then 50 years ago, which I'm sure there's a good amount of people watching tonight who, for some of this stuff, in 1971, I've titled it Championships and Trains, and I'm sure you can guess what one of those is going to be for 1971. And that's this one. April 30th, 1971, the Milwaukee Bucks win the NBA championship. So yes, it's their only NBA championship they've ever won, but it's a historic one. It's history championship. It was just their third season as a professional sports team, and they won. They had completed a 4-game sweep of the Baltimore Bullets in the finals, and it was a historic season overall, not just their championship, but they had set a record for the longest win streak, which was 20 wins at the time. That's since been broken. Abdul-Jabbar had won the MVP that season. Oscar Robertson, who you've seen pictured here in this commemorative basketball card, it was his first season with the Bucks, but he did make the All-Stars team that year. And the Bucks were in 1970 to win the championship since the St. Louis Hawks did it in 1958. Of course, the Bucks are now in the Eastern Conference, where they are chasing their second title, and it might be on the 50-year mark that they get it. You never know. It'd be cool. And in the only instance happening on the same exact day. So while the Bucks were winning the NBA championship, the last Hiawatha ran on April 30th, 1971. So the Hiawatha, named 1855 Henry Wadsworth Longfellow poem, it had become famous for its quick service and its pretty expert marketing campaign. The Hiawatha that ran through Milwaukee was sometimes called the Twin Cities Hiawatha. It had offered morning and afternoon services between Chicago and Minneapolis starting in 1935. And it made stops, of course, in Milwaukee and then also Oconomowoc. So it was a pretty significant cultural figure icon for the greater Milwaukee area. And the afternoon service for the Hiawatha had actually ended a year earlier in 1970. So in 1971, it was just the morning service running for the Hiawatha train. And that's what ended on April 30th, 1971, was the morning service for the Hiawatha. After that, Amtrak took over, and it still runs the commemorative Hiawatha line between Milwaukee and Chicago. And on our last stop here, jump ahead. It's going to be 1996, 25 years ago. So I was alive for this one, 1996. I don't remember either of these events, but it's the only instance of me being alive for any of these memories. So there was some legendary debuts happening in Milwaukee in 1996, and also some pretty bitter goodbyes. So on August 29th, 1996, a young man by the name of Tiger Woods made his professional golf debut at the Brown Deer Park Golf Course during the Greater Milwaukee Open. He was only 20 years old at the time. He had just made the cut. He was an amateur before this, and this was the first time he played in a professional tournament. He ended up tying for 60th place and earning somewhere around like $2,500. And despite just coming out of the amateurs, he was already pretty well known. He was famous. People knew how good he was. His sponsorship with Nike, so he was receiving some of his first Nike gear at the locker rooms at Brown Deer. Even though he tied for 60th, he flashed some good signs. He was going to be a legendary golf player. His first professional hit was a drive, 336 yard away, and he actually ended up, even he was still competing, and he hit a hole-in-one, and that was his first ever professional hole-in-one in golf, and it happened right here in Milwaukee at the Brown Deer Park Golf Course. The GMO, the Greater Milwaukee Open, was held for 42 years around Milwaukee until 2009. It was a pretty famous event, but yeah, it's no longer around. And then the last stop on our time machine tour is a sad one. People are probably still angry about it. I don't blame them. But in fall of 1996, Pabst Blue Ribbon ceases Milwaukee operations. So at the time, Milwaukee was owned by the S&P company, which was not from Milwaukee. Milwaukee operation in Milwaukee. It also left about 250 people without jobs. It was a very bitter decision that left both union workers and the community pretty angered. A lot of people believe that the S&P company did really little to properly promote the Pabst brand and to work to keep that brand in Milwaukee. So people were really angry about it. National boycott of the product. And overall, it marked the end of an era in Milwaukee. It had ended what was then the oldest brewery in Milwaukee and left Miller as the last surviving major beer producer. So yeah, that was the last one we had, fall of 1996, and it was a sad one. But I hope you were able to think about how for how Milwaukee changed years. There's of course so many other events that happened, but these are some of the highlights. But Milwaukee's obviously changed quite a bit, and hopefully some of these events were able to kind of guide you on that journey of Milwaukee changing through positive and negative events. So I think we'll turn it back over to John and see if there's any questions anyone has.
Yeah. Awesome job, Cody. I'm getting some feedback through your speaker just a little bit there. If anybody has any questions, just pop them right in the comments. Especially, or if you have any, if some of these years or some of these memories you remember, or if you have, maybe we missed something in one of these years that you think needs to be said. Go ahead and pop those in there. It's an interesting way to like kind of approach Milwaukee history, to think about it in terms of just these years that. What? Can you hear me?
Oh, I lost you for a second. Keep going. I'm sorry.
You're good.
Yeah.
But like thinking about, 1946 in Milwaukee seems like this, what difference, was made in 1946 or 1921 or things like that. And obviously some things did happen. And so it's interesting to like kind of go through life like that, or go through history like that, to think about what will happen this year on a local scale that we'll still be talking about. But obviously nationally we'll be talking about this for a while. I'll start off with a question though, is that basically what, as you were going through these different milestone years, are there any that like you thought like you had to leave out because maybe you couldn't find like an image or an artifact to go with it, or something that really struck you?
Yeah, there was a few events that I wanted to include. There was some that I just couldn't fit, not because they weren't interesting. There were some that maybe were just tough to find, or maybe they just didn't have enough of a like deeper story behind them. 1946 is when Val Phillips graduated from Howard University, so that was worth mentioning. But I didn't know how I would include it without just saying like, oh, we're done. The other one that I really wanted to include, but we didn't, is in 1971. That's when the American Indian Movement, AIM, that's when they occupied the Coast Guard station in Milwaukee. So a pretty significant Milwaukee event that I wasn't able to mention here, but one that is worth talking about with Milwaukee history for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. You were talking about how Tiger Woods, that was the only one that I was alive for too. That kind of thing, which is interesting looking forward. And how cool would it be if the Bucks won the championship? I have to believe if it weren't for COVID, they would have. They were on such a roll. They were. In my mind, I was already at the victory parade. That was the first heartbreak of many through this whole mess of the last year. I got a lot of people. Evidently, you struck a chord with the PBR crowd.
Oh, did I? I'm sorry.
No, like everybody's thirsty is what I'm saying.
Oh, okay. I got you.
Yeah. Deborah's saying PBR me ASAP. So she says it was her first beer. Yeah, right. Yeah, but now it's really not from Milwaukee as they moved out again. It's interesting, seeing some of these people, some of the memories that are popping up. Maybe this. I know it was right around that time. One of the reasons they also stopped that Hiawatha line right there is because they tore down the Chicago and Northwestern train station. Do you know if it was like right around that same, like, was it in 1971 or shortly thereafter?
I believe so. There was the one on the lakefront that didn't come down until, well, no, that would have been around that same time. I'm not sure to what degree the events are related, but I'm sure they are, whether the cause and effect is there, but it's certainly, it was all happening around the same time.
I mean, it was the rise of freeways and the automobile and the decline of rail transport nationally. So that had a lot to do with it.
And you have to remember that, like that was the era of white flight as well. That's when a lot of Milwaukeeans were moving out to the suburbs, and the people that worked in Milwaukee were driving in from Waukesha County, Ozaukee County, and the trains weren't really able to facilitate the amount of people that were coming in and out. So you're right. The highways were kind of overtaking the trains at the time.
Sure. I know that the destruction of that train station, though, is one of the lingering things that had bolstered the historic preservation movement in the city.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I know we have a lot of pictures, and our archivist Steve Schaffer, when he does some of his presentations, we have some great photos of that train station. One of those buildings that we wish were still around. All right. Well, go ahead.
No, I was gonna say, I think people are even more mad about it because it's been replaced by, like the O'Donnell parking structure, essentially. Like what replaced it is not near what was taken away. So go ahead.
There's a lot of those instances in Milwaukee. So something to consider as we move forward in time as far as what treasures we still have in our community. Well, Cody, thanks so much. A big round of applause to you. And we kind of thought this would be a great way to kick off the new year, is to like take a look back while we continue
think forward.
Think forward, right? Yep. There's there it is. But we will be announcing programming for our new exhibit very, very shortly. So just keep up to date on that at MilwaukeeHistory.net, or of course, if you're on our Facebook page, Twitter, Instagram, we'll have more information about our new exhibit, which we'll be announcing soon. But some of the speakers we got lined up are just going to be really great. And I'm going to bring it back for one question, because I think this is going to be a good question. So this guy's getting one in at the buzzer to keep up with the sports analogies. Marshall says, how hard was it to find the 175 and 150-year-old info? Like, to dig back that far?
So 175 was easy, I'll say. 175 was easy because that's the founding Milwaukee. So like, there's been so much written about it, so much talked about it, that it was really just finding an image. And that I haven't worked at MCHS. I knew we had some good like watercolor like that one of the bridge war. So that content wise, 175 was easy. 150 was tough. I mean, there's stuff happening in 1871, but finding what is like indicative of the growing city is a little tougher. So yeah, that's a good question. I mean, it was 1846 was easy. 1871 was tougher.
Cool. All right. Well, now back to the end. So thanks, Cody, and for all your hard work you put into this presentation. And like I said, keep up to date with what's going on with the Historical Society at MilwaukeeHistory.net or any of our social media, so you can find out. Just to let you know, before February, we're going to have the one and only John Gerda talking again for us. So you'll want to know when that happens. So just stay tuned on that. Cody, best of luck in 2021 to you. For the rest of the year.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
All right. Stay safe, everybody, and hope to see you again. We won't have a live presentation next week, but the week after we'll have one. So again, stay tuned for that, because that'll be related to our next exhibit. So cheers, everybody. Have a good one.